The boy had lived in the small, crowded orphanage for as long as he could remember. The walls were painted a dull beige, peeling in places, and the windows were often fogged with the cold that crept in during the long winters. There were always children running and shouting, yet somehow he had always felt invisible. He moved through the daily routines quietly, eating quickly, making his bed, and then disappearing into the corners where the noise didn't reach. The other children laughed and fought, played games, and occasionally sneaked snacks, but he preferred sitting alone. There was a world inside his head that no one else could see, and it was far more exciting than the crowded halls or the endless chores of the orphanage. His favorite place was the small, abandoned music room at the back of the building. It had once been part of a community hall that the orphanage shared with the town, but years of neglect had left it empty and dusty. The windows were cracked and sunlight barely reached the floor, but in the corner stood an old upright piano. Its keys were chipped and yellowed, and some of them were stuck, but it still made sound. When he sat in front of it and pressed the keys, the notes came out like tiny sparks in a dark room. At first it was just random sounds trying to match the melodies he remembered from old radio broadcasts or from listening to street musicians. But over time he began creating his own music, simple at first, then more complicated, each piece carrying a little piece of his imagination. No one had taught him how to read music. He didn't need lessons or sheet music. He listened to the sounds around him, the rhythm of the wind through the trees, the footsteps in the hall, the laughter of the other children, and he turned those sounds into music. Sometimes he stayed in that room for hours, letting the piano sing what his heart could not speak. At night, when the orphanage was silent and most of the other children slept, he would imagine himself performing in grand concert halls, with people applauding and listening to every note he played. It was a dream that felt impossible, yet in that quiet room it felt real. Only one person had noticed his talent. The retired music teacher, a small elderly woman who volunteered at the orphanage, had walked past the room one afternoon. She paused at the doorway when she heard the faint music drifting through the hall. Her eyes widened and she listened carefully, almost holding her breath. When the boy finally looked up, surprised to see her there, she smiled gently. "You have a gift," she said simply. Those words, spoken once, felt like a spark in his chest. She didn't ask him to perform for anyone, and she didn't demand anything from him. Instead, she began leaving small books about music on the piano, showing him basic techniques in short, careful lessons whenever she visited. She never pressured him, and that made all the difference. Slowly, the boy began learning more about rhythm, chords, and harmony. His music became richer, more expressive, and more confident. Life at the orphanage remained difficult. Meals were sparse, and the children often had to share clothes and blankets. There were fights over small things, and teachers were strict, focusing on rules more than encouragement. But in the music room, none of that mattered. The piano became his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the harshness of the world. He began experimenting, pressing keys in sequences that felt right even if they didn't follow any known musical rules. Sometimes he would close his eyes and play a tune he had imagined in his dreams, and the sound that came from the old piano would surprise even him. It was as if the piano itself understood him, as if it was helping him speak a language he had never learned anywhere else. One rainy afternoon, the boy noticed an old newspaper left behind in the corner of the music room. Its pages were yellowed and fragile, and the headlines spoke of local events and forgotten stories. One article caught his eye. It was about a wealthy man who loved music and had created complex compositions that nobody could decode. The man was famous for his business success, but he also had a mysterious reputation. Musicians had tried to interpret his work for years, but no one had succeeded. The article suggested that there might be hidden patterns in the music, secret messages embedded in the notes. The boy's heart began to race. He had never thought about anyone outside the orphanage, never imagined he could touch the world beyond those peeling walls. Yet reading about the musical challenge sparked a fire inside him. He wanted to see if he could understand it, if he could find the hidden patterns that had eluded so many others. Over the next few weeks, the boy spent every free moment listening to recordings of the Billionaire's compositions. He didn't understand all the techniques or the rules, but he paid attention to the small details. The way a note lingered longer than expected, the slight pause that created tension, the repetition of patterns and sequences that seemed random. At first it was frustrating. Many nights he would stare at the piano thinking he had found a clue, only to realize it led nowhere. But he didn't give up. The same patience and focus he had developed in the quiet hours at the orphanage allowed him to continue, slowly piecing together ideas and possibilities. The retired music teacher noticed his growing obsession. She watched him sit for hours with his notebook, scribbling patterns, drawing symbols, and muttering to himself. Instead of discouraging him, she encouraged him. "Your mind works differently," she said. "You see things others do not. Keep listening. Keep trying. One day it will make sense." Her belief in him gave him courage. For the first time, he felt that his talent was not just a secret he carried to survive, but a gift that could connect him to something much bigger. At night, when the orphanage was silent and the world outside was dark and quiet, the boy would sit at the piano and try to replicate the compositions he had heard. Sometimes he made mistakes, hitting wrong keys or missing a note, but he didn't let frustration stop him. Instead, he listened carefully, corrected himself, and tried again. He began keeping a journal of the patterns he noticed, marking sequences that seemed to repeat and melodies that echoed each other. Slowly, he was building his own understanding of the mysterious music, developing a system in his mind that no one else had. The days turned into weeks, and the boy became more confident in his skill. The music he played started to flow more naturally, blending the techniques he had learned from the retired teacher with the patterns he had discovered on his own. He was no longer just experimenting. He was composing, creating pieces that had structure, emotion, and meaning. Sometimes he imagined what it would be like to meet the billionaire, to show him that an orphan boy from a small city could understand what no one else could. The thought both thrilled and scared him, but it gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Despite the long hours and the challenges of the orphanage, the boy never stopped dreaming. Every day he carried the music in his mind, even when he was doing chores or eating quickly in the crowded dining hall. The melodies followed him, reminding him that there was a world beyond these walls, a world where his talent could shine. He had no idea how or when it would happen, but he believed that one day, the music would lead him somewhere extraordinary. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the cracked windows of the music room, he played a melody he had been working on for weeks. Each note seemed to carry a piece of his life, the loneliness, the struggles, the hope, and the curiosity that kept him going. When the last note faded into silence, he realized that he was no longer just a boy practicing in a forgotten room. He was a musician, a thinker, someone who could hear what others could not. For the first time, he felt proud of himself, not for escaping the orphanage or for surviving, but for creating something beautiful from nothing. The retired teacher stood at the doorway, smiling quietly. "You are ready for the next step," she said softly. The boy looked at her, unsure what she meant, but he felt a shiver of excitement. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead or what doors would open, but for the first time he felt ready to face them. The music that had been his secret companion was becoming his path, a guide that might take him far beyond the orphanage and into a world he had only dreamed of. And so, the boy continued to practice, to listen, and to imagine. He knew that the journey would be long and difficult, but he also knew that he had something that could not be taken away, the gift of music, and the mind to understand its hidden secrets. Each day, the abandoned piano in the corner of the orphanage became not just an instrument, but a key to possibility, to hope, and to a future that was waiting for him to claim it. The days after the boy discovered the newspaper article about the billionaire's musical code were unlike any other he had ever known. Every moment of free time seemed filled with purpose. During meals, he would tap out rhythms on the edge of his plate. In the hallways, he hummed melodies he tried to match to the patterns he had heard. Even while sweeping the floors or folding laundry, his mind raced with sequences of notes, imagining how one sound might lead to another. His curiosity had turned into obsession, but it was a healthy obsession, one that made him feel alive in a way he had never felt before. He began borrowing more old music books from the retired teacher, studying basic theory and harmony. He learned about scales, chords, and intervals, all of which gave him tools to understand what he was hearing. It was hard work, more difficult than he expected. There were times when he wanted to give up, when the notes seemed like a secret language that no human could ever fully understand. But every time he felt discouraged, he returned to the old piano in the abandoned music room. The worn keys seemed to welcome him back, and the music he created there reminded him why he had started this journey. One evening, as rain poured down outside, he played one of the Billionaire's compositions on the piano. At first it sounded chaotic. The sequences of notes jumped in ways that didn't make sense. But slowly, as he listened more carefully, he began to notice repetitions. Certain notes always followed others. Patterns emerged that were subtle yet deliberate. His fingers hesitated on the keys, then moved instinctively as if they knew the answers before his mind could catch up. He wrote down the sequences, tried different variations, and marked what seemed important. Hours passed, unnoticed, and when he finally looked up, the sky had darkened completely. The retired teacher noticed the change in him. She had seen many children come and go through the orphanage, but none had ever shown this level of focus and understanding. She began to ask him questions, not to test him, but to guide him. "Why do you think this note comes here?" she asked one day. "What happens if you change this rhythm?" At first he thought her questions were simple, but he soon realized that they forced him to think more deeply. He began experimenting with more confidence, trying things that seemed strange at first but often led to unexpected discoveries. Her guidance, combined with his own imagination, allowed him to see the music in a way that no one else at the orphanage had. As he delved deeper, he discovered something that amazed him. The compositions were not just random arrangements of sound, they were puzzles. Every piece seemed to carry hidden instructions, like a secret message encoded in notes and rhythms. Sometimes the clues were mathematical, patterns repeating in sequences that formed shapes or numbers. Other times the clues were emotional, a shift in melody suggesting a hidden meaning. He realized that to decode this music, he would need to combine logic, creativity, and intuition, a challenge that both frightened and excited him. Days turned into weeks, and the boy became more daring. He began improvising, testing the compositions against his own musical instincts. If a pattern seemed incomplete, he would try adding his own notes to see if they fit. He discovered connections that no one had noticed before, small bridges between sequences that made the music flow naturally. His mind worked like a machine, analyzing possibilities, testing outcomes, and learning from every mistake. The challenge of the Billionaire's music became a game, one that required every ounce of his attention and imagination. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the orphanage addressed to the retired teacher. She opened it with a curious frown and read quietly. When she looked up, her eyes were shining. "This is an opportunity," she said, smiling. The letter was from a small music competition for young talents, open to anyone under 18. The boy had never considered entering a contest. He had no money for travel, no formal training, and no one to recommend him. But the retired teacher encouraged him. "Even if you don't win," she said, "you will learn something valuable, and someone out there might hear your gift." With the teacher's support, he began preparing. He chose one of the Billionaire's compositions as his piece, hoping that his interpretation would show the depth of understanding he had discovered. Every day after chores he practiced, adjusting his timing, experimenting with dynamics, and perfecting the subtle shifts in rhythm that made the music unique. He poured his soul into every note, imagining the faces of listeners and hoping they would understand what he was trying to express. The music was no longer just a puzzle. It was a story, a reflection of his life, his struggles, and his dreams. The day of the competition arrived. He felt nervous but determined. As he entered the small hall, he noticed other children with polished instruments and confident smiles. Some had sheet music in front of them. Others had practiced for years with teachers and mentors. He felt small and unprepared. Yet the old piano in the orphanage had taught him something important. Confidence comes from persistence and understanding, not appearances. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began to play. The hall fell silent as the first notes escaped the piano. At first, the judges and audience were curious, then surprised, and finally captivated. The boy's fingers moved with precision and emotion, bringing the music to life in a way that was unexpected and compelling. He had taken the Billionaire's compositions, broken down the patterns, and added his own interpretations, creating a performance that felt both familiar and entirely new. As he played the final note, a hush lingered before the hall erupted into applause. He opened his eyes, startled by the warmth and appreciation that surrounded him. After the performance, one of the judges approached him quietly. "You have a rare mind," the judge said. Not just talent, but the ability to see and understand music in ways most cannot. Keep working and you will go far. The boy felt a mixture of pride and humility. He realized that his journey had only just begun. But the recognition gave him confidence that his efforts were not wasted. He returned to the orphanage with a renewed sense of purpose, eager to continue decoding the mysterious music that had captured his imagination. Back in the quiet music room, he sat at the old piano listening to the compositions again. This time he wasn't just trying to understand the notes, he was listening for meaning, for the hidden instructions that the billionaire had embedded in the music. Slowly, piece by piece, he began to uncover sequences that seemed to lead somewhere. Hints that suggested the music had a larger purpose than mere performance. The idea that someone had deliberately hidden messages in sound fascinated him, and he felt a thrill of anticipation at the thought of discovering something no one else had found. As weeks passed, he devoted every free moment to this task. He developed a system to track the patterns, marking repetitions, noting unusual rhythms, and recording interpretations in his notebook. He even began experimenting with his own small codes, embedding messages in the music he composed. He realized that the act of creating and interpreting music was not just about beauty, it was about understanding, problem-solving, and connection. Music had become both his sanctuary and his challenge, a mirror reflecting both his inner world and the mysteries of the world outside. One evening, the retired teacher noticed him staring at the piano in deep thought. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I think I'm close," he said. "I can feel it. There's something hidden in the music, and I think I might be able to find it." She nodded. "Then keep going," she said. "Some of the greatest discoveries come from patience and persistence." "You have both," her words reassured him. The long nights, the lonely hours, and the endless repetitions were all worth it if he could uncover what had been hidden for so long. The boy's focus intensified. He stopped paying attention to distractions and spent more time listening, experimenting, and testing his ideas. Every note, every pause, every shift in rhythm mattered. He began to see patterns in sequences that others would have dismissed as random. Small breakthroughs gave him confidence, and each discovery led to new questions and possibilities. The sense of mystery, the idea that someone had deliberately challenged the world with music, made every day feel like an adventure. Then, one quiet night, he noticed something that made his heart race. A sequence of notes that had puzzled him for weeks suddenly made sense. The melody repeated in a way that suggested a map, a set of instructions embedded within the composition itself. He couldn't fully understand it yet, but he had made a breakthrough. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and for the first time, he felt that he might be able to crack the code entirely. The excitement was almost overwhelming, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew that one discovery was only the beginning, and that the real challenge lay ahead. The boy leaned back from the piano, eyes wide and mind racing. The music had always been a companion, a friend in lonely times, and now it was becoming a guide. He felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. If he succeeded in decoding the billionaire's music, it could change everything, not just for him, but for the world. Yet even without that, he had already grown in ways he could not have imagined. He had learned patience, focus, and resilience. He had discovered the power of creativity and determination. And most importantly, he had realized that his life, no matter how difficult, could be filled with purpose and wonder. With a deep breath, he returned his hands to the keys and began playing again, letting the music guide him forward. Each note was a step closer to the mystery, a step closer to understanding something that had challenged so many before him. The rain tapped gently against the windows, a soft accompaniment to his growing symphony of discovery. He did not know what lay ahead, but he was ready to find out. The challenge was no longer just a puzzle, it was his path, and he was determined to follow it wherever it led. The boy had been working on the billionaire's musical compositions for months now, and something extraordinary was beginning to happen. Patterns he had once overlooked now leaped out at him. Notes that had seemed random now connected like pieces of a puzzle. He realized that each melody was carefully designed, not only to create beautiful music but also to hide something deeper. The idea that someone had left a secret in music fascinated him, and he felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. It was as if the music had chosen him to uncover its secret, and he knew he couldn't let the opportunity slip away. He spent long hours in the abandoned music room, his fingers moving over the worn keys with precision and confidence. Sometimes he would stop, tapping his fingers on his notebook, thinking, comparing patterns and testing theories. Other times he would play through entire compositions, listening for subtle differences in tone, timing, and rhythm. Slowly, a map began to emerge in his mind, a system of hidden messages embedded within the music, each note pointing to the next, like breadcrumbs left by someone who wanted to challenge the world. He felt a thrill every time he discovered a connection that no one else had noticed before. At first, he kept his progress to himself. He knew that the other children at the orphanage wouldn't understand, and the adults were too busy to notice. The retired teacher was the only one who truly understood his obsession. She watched quietly as he scribbled pages of notes, sometimes muttering to himself, sometimes humming a sequence over and over. She never interrupted him, only offering encouragement when he seemed frustrated. "You are seeing things that others cannot," she would say gently. "Trust yourself. You are closer than you think." Her belief gave him courage, and he felt stronger with every passing day. Then, one rainy evening, he made a breakthrough. He had been working on a particularly complicated composition, one that had defeated countless professional musicians. He noticed a small sequence of notes that repeated at irregular intervals. At first it seemed meaningless, but then he realized that the pauses between the notes formed a rhythm that could represent numbers. Suddenly, the sequence made sense. It was a set of instructions encoded within the music. His heart pounded as he wrote down the numbers, then translated them into letters. The message slowly appeared, revealing a series of instructions that seemed to point to something tangible, something real, beyond the music itself. The boy could hardly believe it. He had not only understood the patterns, but also uncovered the hidden message that the billionaire had encoded. It was more than a puzzle. It was a carefully crafted plan, a secret that had been waiting for someone clever enough and patient enough to solve it. He felt a mix of excitement and fear. This discovery was important, perhaps even life-changing. He knew he had to be careful. The instructions were clear yet fragile, like glass. Any mistake in interpretation could ruin everything. Over the next few days, he focused entirely on understanding the message. The sequence of numbers, letters, and notes revealed a larger design. It wasn't just about music. It was about a vision for helping others. The billionaire had embedded a plan for a philanthropic project, something that could impact thousands of lives if it were brought to life. The boy felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. The music that had been his private companion now seemed to hold the power to change the world. He realized that this was not just a challenge of intelligence, but a test of courage, perseverance, and heart. He began practicing the sequence over and over, ensuring that he understood every nuance. His hands danced across the keys, not just playing notes but decoding messages, interpreting meaning, and imagining how each step could be applied in the real world. The music had become a bridge between his imagination and reality, between the orphanage and the vast world outside. Every discovery gave him confidence, and yet he remained humble, knowing that even one small mistake could undo all of his hard work. One afternoon, the retired teacher noticed a change in him. His eyes sparkled with a new energy, and he moved with purpose that went beyond simple curiosity. She asked gently, "What are you planning?" He looked up, hesitant at first, then realized he could trust her. He explained how he had decoded the music, how the notes revealed instructions for a project that could help many people. The teacher listened carefully, her eyes widening in amazement. "This is incredible," she said quietly. "You've done something that no one else could. You must share it with the right person, someone who can make it real." Her words reinforced what he had already begun to believe, that this was bigger than himself, and that the next step required courage. The boy faced a difficult decision. He had no way to contact the billionaire directly, and the thought of sending his discovery into the unknown was terrifying. What if the message was ignored or worse, misunderstood? But he also knew that he could not keep this secret to himself. The music had led him this far, and it demanded action. After thinking for days, he decided to take a risk. He recorded his interpretation of the composition, carefully documenting every note, sequence, and decoded message. He wrote a detailed explanation, ensuring that anyone who listened would understand the depth of his work. Then, with the retired teacher's guidance, he prepared to send it to the billionaire's office, hoping that it would reach the right hands. When the message was finally sent, The boy felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. He had done everything he could, and now it was out of his control. He returned to the piano, not to decode more music, but to play freely, to let the notes flow without pressure. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to enjoy the music simply for what it was. Yet even as he played, a part of him kept imagining what would happen when the billionaire heard his interpretation. Would he be impressed? Would he understand the depth of the discovery? The questions lingered, but he had no choice but to wait. Days passed slowly. The boy continued his routine at the orphanage, helping with chores and studying, but his mind often wandered to the message he had sent. He imagined the billionaire listening to the composition, perhaps leaning forward in curiosity, noticing the subtle patterns and realizing that someone had truly solved the musical code. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He had never considered that his work could reach someone so powerful, someone who had shaped the world with wealth and influence. And yet deep down he felt a spark of hope, a sense that this could be the moment when his life changed forever. Then, one morning, a letter arrived at the orphanage, addressed to the retired teacher. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, and the boy felt a rush of anticipation he had never experienced before. The letter was from the billionaire's office. They had received his recording and explanation, and the billionaire himself wanted to meet him. The boy's heart raced. It was almost too much to believe. A man who had challenged the world with his music, who had remained a mystery to so many, now wanted to meet an orphan boy who had understood what so many others could not. The retired teacher smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "You did it," she said softly. "You solved the impossible, and now your life is about to change." The boy could hardly speak, his mind spinning with excitement and disbelief. He felt a mixture of fear and joy. What would the billionaire be like? What would he ask? Would he be kind or strict? The questions came fast, but one thing was clear. This was the moment he had been preparing for his whole life. The moment when his talent and determination would finally be recognized. The meeting was arranged in a large modern office in the city. The boy had never seen anything like it. Glass walls, polished floors, and grand pianos filled the room, all hinting at the billionaire's love for music. When the man finally entered, he was imposing yet calm, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He listened as the boy explained how he had decoded the compositions, how he had interpreted the hidden sequences, and how he had understood the purpose behind the music. As the boy spoke, he could see a flicker of surprise and admiration in the billionaire's eyes. After a long pause, the billionaire spoke. "I have never seen anyone approach my music in this way," he said quietly. "You have not only understood the notes, but also the meaning behind them. Your mind is extraordinary and your heart is wise. I would like to work with you." The boy felt a wave of emotion he had never known. He could hardly believe the words. The challenge that had once seemed impossible had led him to this moment. A moment that promised opportunity, mentorship, and a future filled with possibility. Over the next few weeks, the boy began spending time with the billionaire, learning not only about music, but also about the world beyond the orphanage. He was introduced to other musicians, innovators, and thinkers who challenged him in new ways. The billionaire encouraged him to continue decoding music, but also to think about how his discoveries could be applied in real life. Together, they began discussing the philanthropic project hidden in the compositions, a plan to help children, create music schools, and bring education and opportunity to those who had none. For the boy, every day was a revelation. He was no longer just a student at an orphanage. He was a collaborator in a project that could change lives. His understanding of music, once a private obsession, had become a tool for creating something tangible and meaningful. The notes he had played in solitude were now part of a larger symphony, one that included people, ideas, and hope. He realized that talent alone was not enough. Perseverance, courage, and heart were just as important, and he had all three, honed through years of struggle and dedication. The boy also learned about the billionaire's life, how his wealth had been built through hard work and innovation, but how his greatest passion had always been music. The compositions that had seemed mysterious were in fact invitations, challenges for those with vision and determination. The billionaire had wanted to find someone capable, someone who could not only solve the puzzle but also understand its purpose. In the boy, he had found exactly that. The realization filled him with awe. He had begun this journey as a lonely, invisible child, and now he was part of something extraordinary. As part 3 of the journey came to a close, the boy reflected on how far he had come. From hours of playing a battered piano in a forgotten room to decoding one of the most challenging musical puzzles in the world, he had grown in ways he could never have imagined. His mind had sharpened, his heart had expanded, and his courage had carried him to a place he had only dreamed about. And yet, he knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenge, the chance to transform lives through music, was ahead. The hidden code had been cracked, but the journey of applying that knowledge had only just begun. He returned to the piano one evening, now in a grand room filled with light and sound, and played a melody he had once struggled with. The notes flowed effortlessly, carrying with them not only the genius of the compositions but also the essence of his own journey, the struggles, the discovery, and the hope. The music had changed him, and now, in a way he could barely comprehend, he was beginning to change the world. The boy's life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. From the small orphanage, he was now part of something much bigger, a collaboration with the billionaire whose music had once seemed impossible to understand. Each day brought new lessons, not just in music, but in leadership, vision, and responsibility. The boy began to see that the music he loved so deeply was more than a form of personal expression. It was a tool to connect people, inspire them, and bring about change. The idea that his talent could have a real impact filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. The billionaire was a patient teacher. He encouraged the boy to explore his ideas while also guiding him to think practically. They met in a grand room filled with instruments from around the world, each one representing a piece of history and creativity. The boy was fascinated by the sheer variety, but he also realized that the key to their project was not just having instruments or money. It was understanding how music could touch hearts and bring people together. The billionaire spoke often about vision, saying, "Music is a language everyone understands, but it can also be a bridge to change. If we can guide it, we can guide lives." Together, they began to plan the philanthropic project that had been hidden in the compositions. The idea was ambitious: to create music schools in underprivileged areas, offer scholarships to talented children who had no resources, and provide instruments and training for those who had never had access to such opportunities. The boy listened carefully, absorbing every detail, and contributed ideas of his own. He suggested small community workshops, public concerts, and programs where older students could mentor younger ones. The billionaire was impressed by his insight, noting that the boy's experience in the orphanage gave him a perspective that others lacked. For the boy, the work was both exciting and overwhelming. He traveled to neighborhoods he had never seen, met children who reminded him of himself, and listened to their stories. He saw the struggles they faced: lack of resources, limited opportunities, and little encouragement, but he also saw the spark of potential. He remembered the abandoned piano in the orphanage, how it had been a sanctuary for him, and realized that these children needed something similar. Music, he thought, could offer them a chance to dream, just as it had offered him. In one small town, he encountered a group of children who had never played an instrument. Their curiosity and excitement reminded him of his own early days at the orphanage. He showed them basic rhythms and notes, encouraging them to explore sound and create their own melodies. At first, they were hesitant, unsure if they could do it, but the boy's patience and encouragement helped them gain confidence. By the end of the session, the children were laughing, clapping, and making music together. The boy realized that the joy of discovery was universal, and that even a small gesture, like showing a child how to play a note, could have a profound impact. Back at the city office, he worked closely with the billionaire to develop more formal programs. They created lesson plans, training programs for teachers, and methods for evaluating talent and progress. The boy suggested innovative ideas, such as integrating storytelling into lessons and using music to teach problem-solving and teamwork. His insights were invaluable because he understood what it felt like to start with nothing, to struggle with confidence, and to need guidance and support. The billionaire often said, "You see the world with fresh eyes. That is your greatest strength." The boy also began mentoring older children, guiding them to discover their talents and encouraging them to think creatively. He organized small recitals, allowing students to perform in front of peers and community members. Each performance, no matter how simple, was a celebration of effort, growth, and courage. The boy realized that success was not just about skill, but about building confidence and giving others the chance to shine. Watching the students grow and share their music filled him with pride and joy he had never known before. Word of the project began to spread. Local newspapers and social media posts shared stories of the children learning music and performing in small concerts. People were inspired not only by the results but by the story of the boy, an orphan who had solved a musical puzzle that had stumped professionals. The project became a symbol of hope, showing that talent, perseverance, and creativity could overcome obstacles and change lives. The boy was invited to speak at community events, and each time he shared his story, he hoped to inspire others to believe in themselves, no matter their circumstances. While the work was rewarding, it was also challenging. Organizing programs, coordinating with schools, and ensuring that resources reached the right people required patience, strategy, and careful planning. The boy learned to manage time, delegate tasks, and solve problems creatively. He made mistakes along the way, sometimes underestimating the effort required or misunderstanding what a student needed, but each mistake became a lesson. The billionaire often reminded him, "Growth comes from action, not perfection. The important thing is to keep moving forward." One day, the boy and the billionaire visited a small rural village where the children had never had access to a piano or even basic instruments. The boy felt a deep connection to these children, remembering his own days in the orphanage when a single piano had been his entire world. They set up a small music room with donated instruments, teaching materials, and sheet music. The boy showed the children simple scales and songs, and slowly, they began to experiment on their own. By the end of the first week, they had created a small performance, clapping and laughing as they shared their music. The boy felt a surge of emotion, realizing that the work he was doing was more meaningful than any applause or recognition. It was changing lives. As the project grew, the boy began documenting everything he learned. He created manuals, lesson plans, and guides for future teachers, ensuring that the program could continue even if he or the billionaire were not there. He also developed new methods for teaching musical puzzles and creativity, drawing on his own experience of solving the billionaire's compositions. His goal was not only to teach music, but to empower children to think, create, and believe in themselves. He understood that talent alone was not enough. Guidance, opportunity, and encouragement were equally important. The impact of the project reached beyond the children. Parents, teachers, and community members began to notice the changes in the children's confidence, discipline, and joy. They began supporting the program, volunteering time, donating instruments, and encouraging participation. The boy realized that music could unite a community, bringing people together with a shared purpose and passion. The project was no longer just about teaching notes. It was about building connections, fostering empathy, and creating a sense of belonging. In the evenings, after long days of teaching and planning, the boy would return to the piano in the billionaire's office. He played melodies that reflected the experiences of the day, the laughter of children, the challenges of organizing programs, and the hope of what was to come. Music had become both his work and his sanctuary, a way to process the emotions of his new life while continuing to explore and create. Each note reminded him of the journey he had taken, from the lonely orphanage to the center of a project that was transforming lives. Through all of this, the boy learned the value of patience and resilience. He understood that change did not happen overnight, and that building something meaningful required dedication, planning, and heart. He also realized that the music, which had once been a private escape, had become a tool for influence and leadership. It was no longer just about solving a puzzle. It was about using his gift to inspire, guide, and empower others. By the end of the first year, the project had grown significantly. Music rooms were established in multiple towns, teachers were trained, and hundreds of children were participating in lessons and performances. The boy had become a mentor, organizer, and role model, guiding the program with creativity, empathy, and determination. The billionaire watched proudly, noting that the boy had exceeded all expectations, not only solving the musical code, but applying it to create something that could touch countless lives. The boy also began receiving letters and messages from children who had been inspired by his story. Some were struggling in difficult situations, some had no access to instruments, and some were simply searching for hope. Each letter reminded him of why he had begun this journey. the same reason he had spent hours at the abandoned piano in the orphanage. His work was no longer just about music. It was about opportunity, encouragement, and belief in human potential. Even as the project expanded, the boy never forgot the lessons of the orphanage. He remembered the loneliness, the struggle, and the small victories that had shaped him. Those memories guided him in mentoring others, reminding him to be patient, kind, and understanding. He knew that each child he taught had their own challenges, and that empathy and encouragement were just as important as technical skill. Music was the tool, but the human connection was the heart of the work. As Part 4 drew to a close, the boy reflected on how far he had come. From a lonely child in a small orphanage to a young mentor and leader, he had grown in skill, wisdom, and heart. The music that had once been a private escape had become a bridge to opportunity, hope, and transformation. He understood that the journey was not finished, that challenges would continue, but he also knew that he had discovered something powerful: the ability to change lives through talent, courage, and compassion. Every evening, as he played the piano, he thought of the children he had taught, the communities he had touched, and the possibilities that lay ahead. Music had become more than a puzzle, more than a passion. It had become a force for good, a way to unite people and inspire hope. The boy smiled, knowing that the journey he had begun in a quiet, abandoned room was now part of a much larger story, one that would continue to grow, transform, and inspire for years to come. Years had passed since the boy first discovered the abandoned piano in the corner of the orphanage. The shy, quiet child who had spent hours alone, exploring melodies in secret, had grown into a young man with confidence, skill, and purpose. He had traveled far from the small city that had been his home, from the life of limited opportunities to a world filled with music, inspiration, and possibility. But despite the change in circumstances, he had never forgotten where he came from, or the journey that had brought him to this point. The philanthropic project that had started as a dream was now flourishing. Music rooms and schools had been established in multiple cities and towns, reaching hundreds of children who had never held an instrument or imagined learning to play. The boy, now a mentor and organizer, spent his days guiding teachers, helping students, and creating programs that encouraged creativity, discipline, and self-expression. Each time he visited a new town or village, he was reminded of the old orphanage, of the lonely afternoons at the piano, and of the spark of hope that music had given him. The billionaire continued to support and guide him, but the boy had grown into a leader in his own right. He had developed a clear vision for the project, one that went beyond simply teaching music. He wanted to create communities where children could explore their talents, feel valued, and believe in themselves. He introduced workshops on composition, performance, and improvisation, encouraging students to express their personal stories through music. He had learned that true growth came not from perfection, but from creativity, courage, and persistence. One of the boy's proudest moments came when he attended a concert organized entirely by students he had mentored. The hall was packed with families, neighbors, and teachers, and the air buzzed with excitement. The children performed pieces they had created, many inspired by the techniques and puzzles he had once solved in the Billionaire's compositions. As he listened, he felt a swell of emotion. Each note was a reflection of the journey he had taken, a testament to the power of perseverance and opportunity. The music was alive, carrying with it the hopes and stories of countless children. Despite the success, the boy never became complacent. He continued to compose, experiment, and explore. He worked on new musical puzzles, combining his own ideas with the principles he had learned from the billionaire. He challenged his students to think critically and creatively, to look for hidden meaning in sound, and to approach music as both an art and a problem to solve. He understood that curiosity was the engine of growth, and he wanted the children to feel the same sense of wonder and discovery that had driven him for so many years. As the years went by, the boy also began to mentor other mentors. Teachers who had grown under his guidance were now leading their own programs, spreading knowledge and inspiration to even more communities. He emphasized the importance of empathy, patience, and encouragement, reminding them that every child was unique with their own strengths and challenges. His approach was simple but powerful: nurture the heart as much as the mind, and let the music guide the rest. The story of the boy who had cracked the Billionaire's musical code began to spread far beyond the communities he directly touched. Newspapers, blogs, and social media shared his journey, highlighting how a once lonely orphan had transformed his life and the lives of countless children through music. People were fascinated by the idea that a single piano in a forgotten room had sparked a chain of events that could change the world. He became a symbol of hope, showing that talent, courage, and perseverance could overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. Yet despite the recognition and success, the boy remained humble. He never sought fame or accolades, focusing instead on the work that mattered most. He remembered the days when he had played in silence, when music had been his only companion, and he felt gratitude for every step that had brought him to this point. He often returned to small, quiet rooms, pianos tucked in corners, and played for himself, letting the music flow without an audience. Those moments reminded him of the joy that had first drawn him to music, the simple pleasure of discovery and creation. One particularly memorable day, the boy received a letter from a young musician in a distant city. The child had been struggling with difficult circumstances, much like the boy had once faced. The letter described how the programs had inspired the child to practice, create, and dream. Reading it, the boy felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He understood more than ever that his journey was not just about his own success, but about opening doors for others, giving them the opportunities he had once wished for, and showing them that talent and perseverance could overcome even the toughest circumstances. The boy also began exploring collaborations with musicians and educators around the world. He shared his approach, combining problem-solving, creativity, and performance, and saw how it could be adapted to different cultures and communities. He realized that music was a universal language, capable of connecting people across continents and backgrounds. Each collaboration brought new insights, ideas, and methods, further enriching the programs he had started. The boy's vision was growing beyond what he had ever imagined, and he felt a sense of responsibility to ensure that it remained accessible, meaningful, and inclusive. Over time, he also reflected on the billionaire who had unknowingly set him on this path. The man had created the musical puzzle, challenging the world to see if someone could decode it, and in doing so, had changed the boy's life. The encounter had taught him not only about music, but about vision, patience, and the power of a challenge to inspire growth. The boy often thought about how small actions, like the creation of a single composition or the gift of a piano, could ripple through the world, touching lives in ways that no one could predict. Even as the programs expanded, the boy stayed true to the core principles that had guided him from the beginning: empathy, perseverance, and creativity. He encouraged children to embrace mistakes as learning opportunities, to see challenges as chances to grow, and to believe in the power of their own ideas. He emphasized that success was not measured by accolades or wealth, but by the impact one could have on others, the joy one could create, and the courage to pursue dreams despite obstacles. One quiet evening, after a long day of teaching and mentoring, the boy sat at a piano in a small music room he had helped set up in a rural village. The room was modest, with peeling paint and simple chairs, but the piano was polished and ready. He closed his eyes and began to play a melody he had composed years ago, inspired by the patterns he had discovered in the billionaire's compositions. The notes carried the story of his journey, the struggles, the breakthroughs, the discoveries, and the triumphs. Each note seemed to echo through the room, connecting the past, present, and future in a way that felt almost magical. As he played, he imagined the children who would learn from these programs in years to come.